Alright, so here's a fun build that you can use to farm this week's Grandmaster Nightfall, which is the Lightblade. One of my favorite strikes. I've done a few solo flawless master runs several seasons ago before the introduction of the power differential that basically makes even master mode on contest, so you're 20 power levels under, which is not as bad as a Grandmaster at 25, but it feels almost identical. But you can find those videos on my channel if you like. I've done a couple runs on Titan. I've done it on Warlock. And just generally speaking, the Lightblade is just probably my favorite all-around strike. I love the boss fight. I like the swamp. I like the challenge that's in it. So yeah, and I wanted to put together a Strand build because I've done quite a lot of Arc Titan over the past several days. I think my last boss builds video was also on Arc Titan, so I wanted to go back on Strand, but I didn't want to just do the same old thing that everybody does, and what I've done as well. I think my last Strand Titan video was an Abeyant Leaps build for the Europa Nightfall or Moon, I can't remember. But there are basically three variations of Strand Titan that I like to build into. So one of them revolves around strongholds, which is what I'm using here, and I'll explain in depth. And then the other one is Abeyant Leaps, which is just a classic, you can't go wrong with it, woven mail from suspending everything. You just like shut down rooms, suspend everything, always have woven mail for you and your teammates. And then there is the classic Syntheseps, which are a universal exotic, but they work extremely good on Strand with Banner of War and Frenzy Blade and 1-2 punch shotguns and grapple melee. Syntheseps on Strand is accomplishing like big things as far as damage goes. But Strongholds is also a very good choice for an exotic for Berserker, especially if you're using Banner of War, because Banner of War is the only aspect in the game that benefits swords. So there's a lot of synergy there with sword gameplay, and Strongholds obviously is a sword-based exotic. So what Strongholds does is it gives you unlimited guard. So even if you're using like a sword that has no guard endurance, I guess, I think if you had 0 guard endurance here, you would have 100 with Strongholds. Same for resistance, because it says with Strongholds it maximizes your stats, which would include resistance and endurance. So that means you can just you can literally hold your guard up indefinitely and tank anything. This is the most effective tank build in the game, just from the guard stats alone and being able to hold that guard up forever. But then another thing that Strongholds does is it gives you restoration ×2. It doesn't say here in the description, but restoration ×2 is an insane amount of health regen. It pretty much broke the game in season 17 when we had Classy Restoration and when Solar 3.0 was introduced into the game. Restoration ×2 is allowing people to just solo flawless dungeons easily, and it was crazy. It was so crazy that they nerfed Restoration ×2 pretty much into the ground and made it non-existent, except for 2 very particular builds. So there's like a Heat Rises / Phoenix Dive build that you can do with Warlock to proc Restoration ×2, and then with Ember of Empyrean you can basically extend the timer on it and keep the uptime going. The other way to build into Restoration ×2 is on Strongholds Titan, and of course, so this, as well as Strand, it also synergizes with Solar, because with Solar, Restoration ×2 is a solar verb. It is a aspect of solar, of the solar subclass. and you can benefit from restoration times 2 on any subclass with strongholds. But with solar, you would be able to use Ember of Empyrean, proc restoration times 2 by guarding and then hitting an enemy with your sword. That's how you activate it with strongholds. And then any solar kills that you get with Ember of Empyrean will extend the restoration times 2 timer indefinitely. As long as you keep getting kills, you can basically keep that uptime. So yeah, strongholds did get a major rework, but and I didn't even really use them before, but I'm a big fan of this exotic, especially on Strand, and because it's something different, you don't see a lot of people using it. So yeah, good time. And so the whole build is unique. This is like I probably shocked a whole bunch of people today playing around with this build, because normally, like, if you end up in a fire team, I did all my runs on LFG, and normally people will be asking for Strand Titans, or if they see a Strand Titan, you can assume one thing. They have shackle grenades, things are going to be getting suspended, woven mail is going to be passed around, and then occasionally you get the Synthoceps berserkers that are just going to be doing insane super damage and frenzied blade damage. But just generally speaking, when you think of a Strand Titan, you think of stuff's getting suspended everywhere. But this is not that build at all. So it's actually kind of funny, because you would not expect to see Threadlings all over the place. But yeah. So why am I using Threadling grenades? Well, because I am playing into that tank role with blocking damage with a sword. And I don't want to just be running around all over the place blocking everything and letting my teammates do all the work, which is kind of the same problem I have with Invis on Hunter. Like, if you're just always Invis, how are you going to kill anything, right? So it's the same thing if you're playing a defensive role as a tank. Then you need to do some damage as well somehow, right? And if it means that you have to stop being a tank to do damage, then, well, you're not really being effective at tanking damage. So how do you do both at the same time? Is you have an ability like Threadling Grenade that does the damage for you while you're tanking, so you can do both at the same time. And when I use this build, I get a lot of kills, even though half the time I'm just running around blocking damage, because the Threadlings are spreading out and doing damage. And with Thread of Evolution, they travel further, they deal more damage. With Thread of Rebirth, all strand weapon kills. So, like, if I'm guarding and I go to swipe a red bar ad just to kill it real quick, proc restoration times 2, it will also proc Banner of War, of course, get those healing pulses going from Banner of War and increase my sword damage, but it will also create a Threadling. Like, Thread of Rebirth pretty much works at the same rate that Siphon mods work for your weapons. So if you're using a Siphon on your weapon, you're producing Orbs of Power basically every other kill, as long as they're in like rapid succession. But with Thread of Rebirth, it is the same thing, except you're making Threadlings like on every other kill. So I'm using Quicksilver Storm, I'm using the Strand Sword, and so both of those weapons are making Threadlings for me. It's basically like they have this fragment. It essentially gives you the Hatchling weapon perk on all your Strand weapons. So it is very good if you're playing into Threadlings. Thread of Generation here is just to get more Threadling grenades, and I tried using like Thread of Isolation. This was kind of like, if I had to get rid of one thing on this build, it would be Thread of Generation, because I don't really want to give up any of my Threadling aspects. And by the way, I didn't discuss Thread of Finality yet, but I will be doing a lot of finishers, because not only will finishers proc Banner of War, but the combat mods that I'm using, such as Proximity Ward, Healthy Finisher, That means that when I do finishers, I will, like I said, proc Banner of War. I'll also heal immediately from healthy finisher, and I'll get an overshield while finishing. And as we all know, with the Lightblade, there are light bearer knights that you have to fight, and all light bearers have a ghost, and you need to go and finish the ghost. So this is where Thread of Finality comes in to complement the whole loop with this build, which is to do finishers whenever possible, because you're basically immune while you do those finishers as well. Like even if the boss is right up on me and I go to finish an enemy, I will be able to survive the boss's presence while I do the finisher, and I'll usually have enough time to get out of the situation afterwards. And so with Thread of Finality, those finishers are producing it's guaranteed Threadlings on every finisher. It's actually kind of nuts. So you're running around guarding with your sword. You don't want to switch weapons to do damage. You can throw a Threadling grenade, get back to guarding. You can finish an enemy, get back to guarding. You don't really have to pull out your damage weapons and start using them that often. I mean, I do throughout the strike, but that's that because I'm not that single-minded with the gameplay. Like obviously there's fights that you have to pick at range, and then there's a time and there's a place for everything. But yeah, I do a lot of finishers. So yeah, lots of Threadlings from these fragments here. But Thread of Generation was the one fragment that I did give up to try out at the cost of less Threadling grenades, unfortunately. If you give this up, but you can run Thread of Warning for Woven Mail. Mind you, I'm using Into the Fray, so I am getting Woven Mail from my tangles. So, you know, it's not like I'm completely without Woven Mail if I don't use Thread of Warning, right? I just have to rely on my tangles, which is fine because I'm using strand weapons, strand abilities, I'm producing tangles just fine. But the one fragment that I did want to use was Thread of Isolation, because rapid precision hits emit Severing Burst, and that Sever is a 40% damage reduction. You're reducing the severed target's damage output by 40%. So this means like you can sever the boss, you can sever a champion, and you basically have almost Woven Mail damage resistance from the enemy, which stacks with Woven Mail. So 40% damage reduction from Sever, plus I think 55% damage reduction from Woven Mail. So you could tank a whole lot of damage with Sever. So I did try it with Thread of Isolation, and it was nice being able to sever the enemies. But I definitely noticed a big difference without Threadling grenades. And to make up for it, I was running like kickstarts. I was running grenade kickstart just to try and get more Threadling grenades, and it's still not as good as Thread of Generation. Like Thread of Generation got a like generally a nerf, but it was more of a rebalance actually. A lot of people think that it was nerfed really bad, but it was more just balanced properly so that like ticks of damage aren't the only factor for giving you grenade energy. Like it is proportional to the amount of damage that you do, right? So like if you hit an enemy with a rocket, you will get more grenade energy than hitting them once with a primary weapon, for example, even if it's 900 RPM. So it's just been balanced. And like I said, I noticed a huge difference. If you're not running Thread of Generation, you're going to be waiting a while for your grenades. So I actually just went back to using Thread of Generation, which you will see for this run. And besides, I have Frenzied Blade, so if I really want to sever an enemy, I can use my melee, which isn't always practical at range. But like when I'm baiting Alakul back and forth between the platforms, I do have time to land a frenzied blade on him as he's jumping onto my platform, and then I can safely get out of there in time without him hurting me, and then he'll be severed for like I don't know how long it is, maybe 8 seconds or something. So yeah, I do have access to Sever if I really need it, but regardless, these are the fragments that I was the most happy with this build. Towering Barricade, because I'm not really using my Barricade for anything. If I was on Abandoned Leaps, I would definitely be using Rally Barricade for the shorter cooldown, and Rally Barricades are just nice for doing weapon damage, fast reloads. This is not a Nightfall where you can post up and do damage from a single position, which is like, so Warlocks aren't as viable for the Lightblade because you can't stand in the Healing Rift. You'll die because, like, yeah, I mean, this whole strike revolves around rotation. Except for a couple of encounters, like in the beginning, yeah, you can definitely post up somewhere. But as far as the swamp goes and the boss goes, which are the two most challenging encounters, yeah, you have to rotate the entire time. You can't just sit anywhere. Even in a Well of Radiance, like, the light bearers can kill you out of the well, and the boss can certainly kill you out of a well. So the towering barricade is just like, if I really need to put up a barricade somewhere just to block some damage temporarily or res a teammate, then I can do that, right? That's the only function I need out of a barricade, really. And as far as the stats go, 100 resilience, 100 discipline, tier 5 recovery, I would go as high as you can with the recovery. Like, if you can be anywhere between tier 4 and tier 6, I think that's fine. But if you can get even higher, that would be better. But keep in mind, I've got Banner of War, so a lot of the times I'll have Banner of War procced, and if I don't have it procced, I will just simply get it going. Like, look for a red bar, do a finisher, hit him with the sword or Frenzied Blade, and boom, I've got Banner of War procced, and then I just get automatic healing, which makes recovery pretty irrelevant. But for those moments when you're not, when Banner of War is not going, then recovery is going to help you out a lot, especially if you're on a strand build that doesn't have Banner of War, obviously. Tier 6 strength, that's just, yeah, not super important for this, but kind of nice that it's relatively high. Then as far as the weapons go, Quicksilver Storm. So because I'm using a sword, I'm not using the sword for boss damage. I'm not using it for burst damage on... Actually, I'm really not using it for anything other than proccing Banner of War and Restoration ×2. That is pretty much all I'm using it for. So if you're roaming around with Banner of War and you're blocking everything with your sword guard, every now and then you need to refresh the timer on Banner of War and Restoration ×2. So you just quickly do a sword swipe, and then, you know, that's basically all it's going to be for. Even if I'm not killing anything, it doesn't really matter. But it is nice to kill some red bars every now and then with it, because I've got enhanced hatchling on it. So every now and then I will get threadlings from it with tireless blade, so that I get ammo on every other kill. So I basically never run out of ammo, and I can also use this, by the way, just like the Abyss encounter in your Ute with the Swamp and the Lightblade. If I want, I will have enough ammo to sword skate through the entire swamp through Weight of Darkness ×10, right? So that is another aspect that you can play into with the sword for that encounter specifically. So produces hatchling from the perk, produces hatchling from Thread of Rebirth. Yeah, it's a vortex frame, so if you do need to do a bunch of, like, if you got a whole bunch of thrall mobbing you, like 5 or 6 of them, well, one heavy attack is just gonna get rid of all of them and produce a few hatchlings or threadlings. But yeah, so the point with Quicksilver Storm is, yes, of course, it is pretty much the best strand primary weapon exotic in the game, because of the grenade launcher, because it makes tangles. Tangles give me woven mail. Auto rifles are anti-barrier weapons, so this is doing all my barrier work for me. But also, the grenades that you get from Storm Chaser do a lot of damage. It's basically like having a heavy grenade launcher. So once you get into the gameplay loop with Quicksilver, like say you're facing off, you're 1v1ing a Grandmaster difficulty anti-barrier champion, you'll be able to prep 3 grenades like in every single magazine without reloading, just by hitting the champion with your bullets. And then you can immediately swap to your grenade mode, land 3 grenades, and by the way, the grenades are also anti-barrier, which is awesome. So, and this is also my damage for Alakul, right? Because I'm definitely not going to be using my sword on the boss. And the reason I say that is because I tried and I made myself look like a fool. Yeah, you're even with this build, as tanky as it is, with Resto ×2, with Banner of War, with guard resistance and all that kind of stuff, and Woven Mail and Sever, Alakul can still just immediately kill you. And yeah, unless you're extremely experienced and know exactly what you're doing, do not use the sword against the boss. And I wouldn't recommend you use it against anything other than red bar trash ads, just to keep your gameplay loop going with your abilities. Banner Warrior, Resto ×2, produce Threadlings, etc. That is basically a sword skate through the swamp if you want. That's what it's for. It's utility. It is it's to keep the uptime on your build going, basically. Quicksilver Storm is basically your heavy weapon. And then Iterative Loop is for stunning unstoppables, but there are also arc shielded knights. You can actually get away without any unstoppable weapon in this strike, because the unstops are at range. But this is actually a fusion rifle, a rapid fire especially, is very effective against Screebs in the swamp. It'll kill the Screebs faster than Quicksilver Storm will, unless you have grenades prepped. So this is like a good one-shot option versus Screebs. And then on that reload, I get bolt shot, so then I can do some basically chain reaction damage on my next shot. So this is a good tool to get through the swamp, as well as the sword and grenades on Quicksilver, and the arc shielded knights, like I said. So that's pretty much it for the weapons. And as far as the mods go, I'm using producing orbs from Harmonic Siphon, Harmonic Targeting. I like my weapons to feel good and snappy, so Harmonic Loader, Harmonic Dexterity. The Harmonic Dexterity is actually more important here than Harmonic Loader. You would think that reloading Quicksilver would be more important than pulling out your strand weapons faster, but with Strongholds, when you are swapping from your like Quicksilver Storm, and then all of a sudden you see Alakul's hand raise up, and you know he's about to start blasting you with arc, you need to get your sword out as fast as you can and block. So this is actually kind of critical, I would say. Like, I've fine-tuned this build after doing several runs in the Lightblade, and dexterity goes a long way. Firepower, so my Threadling grenades are going to make orbs for me as well, which is just nice all around. And then for my chest, I have emergency reinforcement. I was using grenade kickstarts for a while, but I found that I was dying a lot, even with, like, I had concussive dampener and I had arc resistance. But I just found, like, my armor charge wasn't really going to great use with Kickstart, because Thread of Generation was already giving me a lot of Threadling grenades, especially because all my Threadlings that I'm producing from various different sources are working with Thread of Generation, right? So I'm getting grenade energy just from my Threadlings doing work. So Kickstart mod's not super necessary. And so instead, I just decided to go with emergency reinforcement. That way, if I get critical, this can kick in, and then I'll get even more damage reduction. Like, I don't know the specifics of this mod, but it just sounds good in theory. And when I was using it, my survivability did seem to be a little bit better than without. Strand scav, just so I can make sure I have more sword ammo. Innervation and recuperation, so grenade energy from picking up orbs, making tons of orbs. So, you know, that's just an immediate boost to grenades. And then recuperation is just something I pretty much always use on my strand builds, even with Banner of War. Yeah, you can't really beat picking up an orb and getting a chunk of healing, especially when your subclass doesn't really have many other options for healing. I mean, if you're really playing into the build properly, like with Restoration ×2 and Banner of War, Strongholds, you shouldn't need recuperation, but you can have it there if you want. And then Healthy Finisher, so this is another function for my armor charge, right? I don't really feel like it's at odds with Emergency Reinforcement, because if I get critical on health, either this is going to kick in, and if it doesn't, well, then my finisher is going to heal me. So, and it only consumes 1 armor charge, so why not? Plus, I've got Proximity Ward, so I get an overshield while doing my finisher, so it is extremely hard to die while doing a finisher. Like I said, I think I did a finisher with Alakul straight on me, like on a barrier or an enemy, and I survived his axe swing while doing the finisher. So very good. And then Bomber is just kind of a whatever perk here, because I'm really not casting my barricade often at all. So if you want, you can go with something that suits you better here. But yeah, like obviously these finisher mods are kind of key, especially because I'm using Thread of Finality, right, to produce Threadlings. I want to be and to proc Banner of War. So yeah, you may as well fully build into finishers. Yeah, that's pretty much it. And I got as far as the mods go here, I went with these Elemental Fury communal pickups and refreshing pickups, because some of these I'm not going to read them out. I don't really feel like reading them out, but basically these mods are kind of based around, like, if your teammates pick up or break your tangles, then I'll get my tangles back faster. Also, I'll get ability energy by damaging enemies with my tangles. And then I've got Monochromatic Maestro, which is a no-brainer here. If you are using a subclass with elemental matching weapons, then you should always be using Monochromatic Maestro, because it is a 10%. I didn't realize here, it actually says bonus granted is 10% for 5 seconds to your weapons and your abilities, basically. Like, they work off of each other. So ability damage will give you weapon damage, and weapon damage will give you ability damage. It's probably on a cooldown, but regardless, it's 10% to all strand types of damage, basically. Yeah, I wish Bungie would actually put more numbers in the game, like as far as mods and fragments and aspects and stuff like that. I don't know why they actually included it here with Monochromatic Maestro. That's unexpected, but definitely a good thing. And then Rapid Fire Ranger. I mean, you should always have this on, pretty much, unless you're on like a pure melee build. But if you have any type of weapon that you can do precision damage with, you should always have Rapid Fire Ranger on, because that applies the 15% weakening debuff to the enemy, which is I believe it's a void debuff, so it synergizes with void subclasses as well. But you can get it on any subclass, so very good. Definitely use it. And then, like I said here, I've got a few Adept Loaded Questions in my vault from last season or the season before. I have an overflow with Controlled Burst, but obviously I'm trying to get an Envious Assassin Controlled Burst, because it is basically the meta for high impact, like for fusion rifles. If you're going to use a fusion rifle for boss damage specifically, not necessarily in a strike or a nightfall, but for doing like raid or dungeon boss damage, then Envious Assassin and Controlled Burst, like if you're using like tractor cannon and then you have to rely on special ammo for damage, then fusion rifle with Envious and controlled burst is just like the highest total damage that you can do with any fusion rifle. So I've got one with overflow and controlled burst, which is close. It's not as good as Envious, because Envious you can basically do like, you can dump your entire reserves essentially without ever having to reload. But yeah, so overflow is kind of the next best thing, and then one of these two reload. Any reload perk is good. Like if I'm like, imagine if I'm on Striker with Touch of Thunder pulse grenades, where I'm getting pulse grenades back every 5 seconds basically from all the traces. Well, then I can just keep controlled burst going. I could essentially just shoot this fusion rifle without ever having to reload, just by throwing grenades every 5 seconds, which you can do with Touch of Thunder pulse grenades. And it would synergize because it's arc. So you can, like, this would be very good with Monochromatic Maestro, Demo, Touch of Thunder pulse grenades, controlled burst. Auto loading's decent as well, like if you're doing a damage rotation, but probably not going to be using it all that much. So, and it has charge time, so I will hang on to that one. But yeah, that's pretty much it. So anyways, I haven't made up my mind yet if I'm going to post the full gameplay for the strike or just the boss fight. I feel like the boss fight is the most important part. So anyways, yeah, you can look forward to the gameplay next, and I will see you in the next one.
Temple of Oryx is protected by one of Savathun's toughest warriors. It's guarding something you can use like you use Sagira's shell. But the only way in is through some old canals, which means we need a boat. Leave that part to me.
path is unblocked.